Hey guys, it's Monica, and in this peaceful parenting video, I'm going to be talking to you about punishment and discipline and why I see them as completely separate things. I'll be sharing with you some ideas of how it's possible to raise respectful, kind, strong, moral, and overall good people without the use of punishment, as well as some of the negative and maybe unintentional consequences of using punishment to raise our kids. I'd love you to hit the subscribe button and stick around for more videos like this, as well as other healthy living tips and insights. I'm making this video as a part of the peaceful parenting aspect of my channel, as this is something that I'm super passionate about. I just want to preface this by saying I am not a perfect parent. None of us are, and parenting is a journey, and hopefully we are all learning and growing in this parenting journey every day. I've read a lot about this topic and have gotten deeply involved in this philosophy. It has helped my parenting, family cohesion, and overall cooperation and the family immensely. So my goal is definitely not to tell you how to parent your children or to judge you for the way that you do so, but to provide information to you that is hopefully helpful and be a resource for you in navigating your own experiences. We all have our unique experiences that have led us to our current beliefs and current practices. I just feel that by treating children as full people, doing some perspective sharing, and making the choice to explore other paths beyond what we know from our own childhood, to be vitally important in the macro sense of what kind of culture we have and want to create. I personally would like to see one with a lot more love, empathy, cooperation, true passion for life, learning, and serving others. I'm a firm believer in continuing to educate ourselves throughout our whole lives, questioning ourselves and our beliefs, and being open to new perspectives and ideas. I definitely don't agree with that notion that, well, this is how I was raised and I turned out fine. There are literally no perfect people, and we are all capable of learning and growing. And I don't think we should settle for fine, but instead always strive towards progress and improvement. I'm simply suggesting that we consider not staying stuck, look at and evaluate our behaviors as a culture, and make improvements based on our research. Many of the things I discuss in this video come from several different sources, two of which are a couple of books, one called Unconditional Parenting by Alfie Kohn and Preventing Violence by James Gilligan, which isn't even a parenting book, but I think the information in there is really relevant and helpful when it comes to this topic. There's a ton of unconditional wisdom in these books that is extremely eye-opening, and I highly recommend checking them out. So we're going to talk about the differences between punishment and discipline. Let's start with punishment and why I feel it falls drastically short of our long-term goals for our kiddos. To do this, let's for a second think about what our common goals are for our kids. Many would agree we want our kids to be able to function in the world and take care of themselves in adulthood. Other goals include being morally courageous, respectful of themselves and others, kind, compassionate, empathetic, and able to bring their own unique gifts into the world and have a purposeful life. Okay, so assuming that you agree with these goals, and maybe some people have different goals for their kids, but I would say overall, many parents would probably want this for their kids. So what is punishment and what is its purpose? Punishment is the act of punishing, used to inflict pain, suffering, or loss on a person or group, typically in retribution or to get them to behave in a particular way, especially as seen in child rearing. It's often thought of as just a part of life, necessary and normal, but it actually may fall quite short of its goals and maybe not the best way to accomplish our long-term goals for our kids. In the book Preventing Violence, it's examined how using punishment and shame actually creates violence for several different reasons, and I highly suggest reading it, as I obviously can't go into all of the detail and nuances in this video. But one thing that I do want to point out from the book is how punishment increases feelings of shame and humiliation and actually decreases feelings of guilt, which gives rise to more aberrant behaviors because he argues, 1, punishment stimulates violence, 2, punishment itself is a form of violence, 3, violence only leads to more violence, 4, punishment is ubiquitous with revenge in many cases, 5, revenge is endless, leading only to endless, vicious circles of counter-revenge. This author is a really smart guy. He spent 25 years as a prison psychologist, learning from and studying some of the most violent offenders in our country. He was on staff for several years at Harvard. I think he's currently a professor at NYU. So obviously vastly more experience than me in this area, and he's presented some hard-hitting arguments against punishment in this book. So punishment does a few other things to our children, even when it's coming from a place of love. Corporal punishment, which is hitting or spanking or causing physical pain, has been shown by years of study and evaluation to have have only negative effects in the long term. And you guys don't even need to take my word for it. There's so much available information on these topics, and I highly recommend doing your own research and educating yourself about the subject. So the scientific findings of particularly corporal punishment show only temporary changes in behavior, as well as a long list of negative outcomes, including increased aggression, loss of self-esteem and self-confidence, mental health effects, and so on. Any form of punishment, though, is going to have negative consequences that you may have not considered before. It might condition people to behave in a certain way as long as that threat of punishment or that fear is present, but it will also have the following unintentional consequences. So the first unintended consequence is that it takes the focus off of the behavior you're trying to correct and puts it on the child themselves. In short, it makes them behave and think selfishly. So instead of focusing on the harm or destruction that they've caused to someone else or something else, instead, they focus on themselves and the harm being done to them. So for instance, if you're punishing a child for hitting, and obviously if you're spanking a child or hitting a child for hitting, this is going to be a really hypocritical message. Don't hit your brother as I hit you. That doesn't really fly. People don't really respond to hypocrisy, and I think that's pretty obviously hypocritical. But it's also problematic to punish in, say, lighter ways, like timeouts or taking away privileges. For instance, the focus of the infraction should be on the child they hit or the person they hurt, and the natural consequences that ensue when you hurt someone. We explain that we don't hit people because it hurts them and it makes them feel bad and it makes them feel sad, and none of us want to feel that way. They need to be able to empathize with the person that's hurt and not just think, oh crap, what's going to happen to me? We want them to think about the person that they've harmed and how they can repair that damage, versus thinking, well, if I hit this person, then I'm going to get in trouble and I'm going to have a timeout. Then they start thinking, me, what's going to happen to me? This doesn't teach the underlying lesson. It teaches, I'm going to suffer if I'm caught. Which brings me to the next unintended consequence of punishment. It makes them get really good at lying and sneaking around. So if you know you're going to get punished or hurt if you make a mistake, or if you hurt someone, or if you do something wrong, you're definitely not going to be forward about that mistake and try to fix your behavior or work through that behavior. You're going to try to hide it. We don't want to punish our children for the mistakes that they make. We want to teach them through it. If we are punishing them when they make a mistake, then they don't think that they can come to us and say, you know what, I really messed up, and how do I fix this? What do we do? They say, oh no, I'm gonna get in trouble, and my mom's gonna hit me, or I'm gonna be in timeout, or I'm gonna be grounded. They're not working through that mistake. They're not thinking about the mistake. They're thinking about the consequence to themselves. And if it's a behavior or a value or moral that you're trying to instill in a child, punishing them if they aren't following through or if they're doing something that we don't like is not gonna motivate them to do that thing. And this is kind of a universal thing for adults and kids alike. If we don't have that intrinsic motivation to do something or to not do something, once that threat of punishment is removed and that fear is gone, there's nothing stopping them from doing it. They might still do that thing, but they'll lie about it or they'll hide it. How many times as an adult have we not followed a rule that we didn't agree with? And wouldn't it be great if we were all just perfect all the time and did everything that we were told and always just followed every single rule? I'm being sarcastic, and of course that would not be good. I can think of a few examples where bucking the system or rebelling against injustice has served us all. Typically, we follow the rules that we see value in, keep us safe, and provide for a functional society. For kids, it's not as much about getting them to agree with the rule or that moral rebellion, but getting them to understand their value when they're young. We really need intrinsic motivation to do what's right, not external threats. And moving on to the next thing is that it pits us against our children, and they don't think that we're on the same team. It erodes our relationship with our kids. And if you watched my Peaceful Parenting Overview video, I explain how our relationship with our kids is the most important thing that we really want to foster. Having a strong, trusting, secure relationship with our children is the only real power that we have in the end. Because come the late teen years, we get fired. We don't have the option to control them anymore with timeouts or spanking or grounding, because they can make that choice not to listen to us. They can leave. If we're always controlling them through means of threats and punishment and fear, they'll build up so much resentment and anger. By the time that they're free from those threats and punishments, then they're likely to rebel in a pretty strong way. You talk to parents of teens and grown children, and you always hear the same stories of how challenging the teen years can be, because we don't have those controls anymore. And the only control that we have is our relationship at that point. When we punish and give timeouts, they're going to react in two different ways. They're either going to internalize it or they're going to externalize it. So when they externalize it, they're sitting there thinking, oh, I'm so misunderstood, nobody gets me, I'm not in the wrong, my parents just don't understand me, they're the ones who are wrong. They make excuses and justify their behavior. These kids are not sitting there thinking about the wrong that they've done, they're thinking about how you've wronged them. They're probably not learning the lesson that you're trying to teach, instead learning next time don't get caught. So if they're not externalizing it, then they're internalizing it. And this can have really, really damaging effects. Those kids are sitting there thinking, you're right, I'm awful, I'm so bad. In fact, I'm so bad that my parents don't even love me right now. They can't even give me love. They put me over here by myself because that's how bad I am. I'm making all these mistakes and I'm just a horrible person and I'm a really bad kid. And when I'm at my lowest and I've really screwed up, my parents aren't even there for me. They're not feeling our unconditional love or that they're deserving of it. And this can manifest in shame, which is one of the major catalysts of violence and destructive behavior, obviously having some very serious negative effects on their self-esteem and resilience in the long term. So now that we've gone over punishment and why authoritarian parenting may not be the most effective in helping us reach our long-term goals for our kids, you may be thinking what many people think, and that's, if I'm not authoritarian, then my kids are just gonna run around like crazy and we're gonna have no control, and I want my kids to respect me, and if I just ask nicely, then that's not gonna work either. Or maybe you're on the more permissive side of parenting and you definitely are not a crack the whip sort of parent, and you don't want to do that, but you also feel like you've lost control and order, and things aren't really vibing on that side either. Most people think that these are the only two kind of ways of parenting and some spectrum of that in between. But really there's a whole separate way of parenting, and that's where peaceful parenting and positive discipline come into the picture. So keep watching and check out part 2 to learn what I'm talking about. And be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you've learned something useful or found it helpful.